Welcome to the Lance Kramer Experience.
That very day, two of them were going into a village named BCS, about 0.4 miles from the North Central University Orfield Apartments, and they were talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing together, Professor Kramer himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing Christ in the Old Testament. And he said to them, "What is this conversation that you are holding with each other as you walk?" And he said to them, "O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Professor Kramer interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning Jesus in the Old Testament.
Welcome to the Lance Kramer Experience. I'm Josh.
And I'm Cleopas, and we're looking back to when we met Professor Kramer on the road to BCS.
That's where we found out that all of Scripture is actually anticipating the coming of Christ.
One of the things he told us about was Genesis 3:15, when God says to the serpent, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." Kramer explained in this verse about the seed of the woman, about the one who will crush the head of the serpent and defeat sin and Satan.
This promise, given in the book of Genesis, is the beginning of a theme that we can trace throughout all of Old Testament Scripture. It's even assumed by Old Testament authors that we're understanding this and we're looking for the seed of the woman and the offspring that was going to come, and keeping that in mind as we read.
In this 3-part podcast, we'll be following the seed of the woman, the one who will crush the head of the serpent, through the ranks of Moses, the prophets, and all of Scripture, as we seek to understand Jesus in the Old Testament.
Following the Baba Batra order that Kramer explained to us, the arrangement of the Old Testament that the Hebrews would have read from, we start with the Torah, then the prophets, and then the writings. We can follow the through line of the Old Testament prophecy and pictures that tell us about Jesus. In this first part, we'll begin with Moses and the Torah.
After the fall, God promised a serpent crusher. Mankind began to look for who the offspring would be. Eve's first children were Cain and Abel.
Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, "I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord." Genesis 4:1.
Now, Eve probably thought Cain was the promised offspring that the Lord was talking about, but it'd be a long time before he would come.
Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in a field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Genesis 4:8.
Turns out, Cain was not the seed of the woman, but actually the seed of the serpent. He was at enmity with God and on the side of sin and Satan, not the one prophesied to destroy evil. So, the search continues for the promised seed of the woman.
Genesis 4:25 says, "And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth, for she said, 'God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him.'" We see from this that Eve was looking forward to Seth as the one that Genesis 3:15 promised. And we know that because of how she used that word there, offspring.
That's
right? She was hoping that this was going to be the one.
So, each generation of people, each new child that's born in the line, the people are looking for the one that will crush the serpent.
That's right. They're looking for him.
6 or 7 chapters later, we see a new character jump on the scene, Abraham. We see that God will continue to keep his promise through the line of Abraham.
That's right. In Genesis 15:5, we see that God will bless the earth through a singular offspring of Abraham. This offspring was the basis of Abraham's hope.
Genesis 15:5 says, "And he brought him outside and said, 'Look towards the heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them.' Then he said, 'So shall your offspring be.'" It could be argued that this word offspring is meant to be referred to a singular offspring. That is, God is using this moment to look forward to Jesus and his offspring, true Israel.
So, from Adam and Eve to Abraham, we can see that Scripture is tracking the promise of the seed of the woman. This coming offspring was hope for every generation, and Scripture continues to point to this coming offspring all the way up to King David. Next, we see David and how he is actually a picture of the serpent crusher.
Like Barry Bonds playing in a Little League World Series.
That's right, Cleopas. David absolutely crushes the serpent's head right out of the park.
That's right.
You might ask, how is Goliath a serpent, though?
Funny you should ask. Well, in Hebrew, when explaining the armor of Goliath, it describes it as scale armor. Samuel 17:5 says, and he was clothed in scale armor, which weighed 5,000 shekels of bronze. This scale armor is a reference back to the serpent crusher in the beginning. That's
right. You cannot deny that this promise made in Genesis 3:15 is a reoccurring and prominent theme in Old Testament Scripture. Professor Kramer, right, wanted us to understand that every time we read Scripture, every time we open up the Old Testament, we should be looking for this kind of imagery and this kind of language that's referencing back to Genesis.
That's right. Because each time the Bible is pointing forward to the coming of Jesus, the only one who can truly fulfill what Yahweh promised in the Torah.
And with that, we look forward to next time when we'll be looking for the seed of the woman through the prophets.
That's right. We'll see y'all next time on the Lance
Kramer Experience.